Hello friends. How are you all? In this video, we will see the second part of what if Naruto became conqueror of the Avatar multiverse. Azula grumbled as she was led through a forest by the young blonde who still had her tied up with the energy rope. They walked into a small clearing where Naruto paused. He glanced around and nodded to himself. Yeah, this place should work. Naruto turned to Azula. We'll sleep here tonight. Azula frowned. You want to stop here, out in the open, when the better smarter thing to do would be to find a cave or something. There are no caves around here. Besides Haim-chan, why would you want to stay in a cave when you could sleep in a nice house? Azula gave him a questioning look and he smirked before going through several hand seals ending in the snake seal. Mokuden. Shichuka no Jutsu would release. 4 Pillars House Technique. The Fire Princess stood surprised as she watched wood burst out of the ground form a building. However, that surprise was replaced by a feeling of underwhelming. Is that your definition of a nice house? Naruto's eye twitched as he blushed. The house in front of them looked horrible. It was uneven, with one half of the house over 2 stories tall and the other half was barely 1. Not only that, but the wood didn't fit together perfectly and there were many gaps in the walls. Plus there were branches with leaves growing out the house. There isn't even a door. Azula commented. Shut up. Do you know how hard it is to grow a house? I'd like to see you try. Naruto yelled at her. Azula rolled her eyes and looked away. Whatever. Just untie me now. Naruto looked at her for a moment before shrugging and releasing the technique, the rope fading into nothing. Moving her arms around, Azula walked towards the house. She lit a blue fireball above her palm that immediately turned orange, much to her irritation. What are you doing? Naruto asked. I'm going to make a door, she said. And burn down the house in the process. Azula scoffed. Oh please. I can stop the fire from spreading that much, she said as she reared her hand back. Naruto grabbed her wrist and clasped his hand over hers, snuffing out the flame. I also don't want a big ass hole in the wall. Well then, how do you suggest we get in? Azula asked. Naruto pulled out a kunai and started spinning it by its ring. I'll cut out a door using windbending. He slashed at the wall several times, then kicked the cut part down and walked through the square-shaped hole. Azula shook her head. Oh, but you don't want me to make a hole. Naruto either ignored her or didn't hear her as he looked around. Well, at least I made doors in here, he said as he noticed several doors for bedrooms. You shouldn't have made it so big. Naruto's eye twitched and he turned to Azula, who was glancing around. There are only 2 of us, there's no need for it to be this big. Naruto shot her a dry look. He had a feeling that if he had made the house smaller she would have complained about it being too small. Turning her gaze onto Naruto, Azula decided to ask him something that had been bothering her all day. So, Uzumaki, seeing as how I'm stuck with you, for now anyways, I think I deserve to know what your plans are. Seriously, what reason would the Avatar have to travel back 500 years in the past? Naruto blinked blankly for a second before snapping his fingers. That's right, he exclaimed. I was going to ask you before, but with all of the lying and backstabbing I forgot. You're a princess. If there was a person or people causing disorder or big trouble, you would have heard about it, right? Causing disorder or big trouble? You mean rebels? Naruto shook his head. No, more like people who are causing enough trouble to disrupt the balance of the world. The balance of the world? Azula looked at him incredulously. You do remember the world has been at war for the last century. That could be anybody. Damn, you're right. I guess that's not what they are doing then. How am I going to find them then? Find who? Azula asked. Well, apparently there are other people from my time who traveled here and their presence is causing an imbalance in the time-space continuum or something, and the spirits decided that since they're from my time and my homeland that it's my duty to bring them back instead of the current Avatar, who is already here and should be fixing the imbalances of his own time, or Kuin's, the one who let them come here in the first place. Naruto raged. He can do it easily. He's the freaking spirit of time, for crying out loud. He screamed to the sky. Sometimes I really hate spirits. Most of them are demanding and selfish. They do things or demand stuff for their own benefit without any regard for what it'll cost us, because we're just lowly humans, or foolish mortals. Azula was a bit shocked to hear him say that. She had heard that the Avatar was an ally to the spirits. Well, that sounds like a big pain. The princess stated. Are they here in the Fire Nation? I don't know. Azula sighed in annoyance. Why are they here? You can probably start your search based off that. Naruto nodded. Yeah, except I don't know why they're here. Of course you don't. Azula deadpanned. Well, who are they? That can give you a clue. I don't know. What do they look like? I don't know. How many are there? I don't know. You don't even know that. Azula exclaimed. Do you know anything about your targets? I know at least one of them is an earthbending master. Azula stared at him in disbelief. That's it. And you're planning on dragging me with you on this wild turkey goose chase? How do you plan on finding these people only knowing that? Oh, shut up. I'll figure something out. And I turkey goose. Naruto looked at her oddly before shaking his head. Anyway, believe me, I didn't want to involve any more people than I had to, but in good conscience I can't let someone who wants to, and can, start a world war just roam around. If you just find a better goal in life you won't have to hang around me anymore. Azula snorted. The idea was almost tempting. Naruto yawned. Are we done talking, because I haven't slept since yesterday and I'm going to bed now. Good night, he said as he walked into one of the rooms. Azula watched him shut the door and realized that she hasn't slept since yesterday either, plus they had been walking all day. Walking into one of the rooms, Azula frowned as she discovered it to be empty. Am I supposed to sleep on the floor? She called to the young ninja. There was a moment's silence before his door opened and a rolled-up sleeping bag flew out, landing at her feet. Azula HMPHED, picking up the bag and walking into her room. Azula, like all firebenders, rose with the sun the next morning. Stretching, she decided to do something she hadn't done in months: train. She walked outside and soaked in the sun's rays, feeling invigorated. Azula took a deep breath before settling into a firebending stance and running through a few katas. She got through the first two perfectly, although her moves were more sluggish compared to a few months ago. It was during the third kata, which involved a jumping kick, that she messed up when she didn't land right and fell down. Grumbling, she got up and ran through it again, getting it right this time. She ran through more sets, each one harder than the last, then messed up once again during a double spin. She tried that same sequence another 5 times before she was able to get through it without falling. However, Azula wasn't satisfied. She glared at her hand. She had released an arc of fire too low, and being the perfectionist that she was, that was unacceptable. Azula didn't know what was more frustrating, that she was messing up moves she mastered when she was 10, or that her blue fire was almost instantly turning orange. I'm guessing you're more of a technique user, right? Azula turned to Naruto, who was sitting against the house pouring water into 2 large cups with an amused look on his face. What do you mean by technique user? She asked. Well, judging by your performance there, Naruto chuckled as Azula's face flushed and she glared at him. I think it's safe to say you're not much a form-type bender. Azula looked at him confused. What are you talking about, technique user and form-type? Naruto blinked. You don't know. There are 2 ways bending is used, through form or technique. He grabbed the cups and let out a deep breath, the water starting to steam. Form style is bending that is executed with taijutsu. Taijutsu. Naruto rolled his eyes and translated, hand-to-hand combat, martial arts, whatever. And technique style is bending that is executed with simple psychical movement and great manipulation of energy, sort like jutsu. Most people tend to be better at one than the other. Form-type benders are more close to mid-range fighters and are in better physical condition, while technique types are more mid to long-range fighters and have better Kai control. Really skilled technique types can bend without any movement. They're the ones who end up mastering their element the fastest. Azula's eyes widened at that. Are you saying that they can bend with just their thoughts? Naruto nodded. Like actual attacks? Naruto nodded again. That's impossible. It is too possible, Naruto argued. Azula scoffed. Yeah, right. Naruto frowned at her before smirking. Out of nowhere, Azula was knocked down by a gust of wind. Then before she could hit the ground, she was landed on a small tornado that hovered her a few inches off the ground, then launched her higher into the air and was held up there by swirling wind spinning around her body. Azula panicked, wildly flailing her arms and legs around, causing her to flip upside down. Azula screamed, expecting to start falling, but after a moment of just floating there upside down, Azula's panic turned into irritation, her ire growing as she heard Naruto laughing. "You have a surprisingly cute scream." She looked up, or down, at the boy, who hadn't moved an inch. "Told you it was possible," he said. "Controlling and manipulating energy like Kai or chakra is mostly mental work." Naruto told her. "Plus the more you use a technique the easier it becomes to use until it becomes as easy as breathing. At least that's what I've been told. I'm not at that level yet." Truth be told, it was taking all of his concentration to pull off this little stunt. Even thought he was a master, his Kai control wasn't all that great. "Fine, it's possible," she said through gritted teeth. "Now put me down now." The wind swirling around her stopped and she fell, bouncing off a bubble of air and landing on her feet. Regaining her bearings, Azula sent a smoldering glare at Naruto. He stopped smiling and gulped nervously. "Don't do that again," Azula growled venomously. Naruto nodded quickly. All right, Haim-chan." She stared down at the boy, making him sweat. What is it, Haim-sama? So what type are you?" Naruto mentally sighed in relief, glad she wasn't going to hurt him. "I'm a form type," he said pridefully. "Technique types may be better the benders, but we're the better fighters." "Wait, how is that possible?" Azula asked, not being able to grasp that fact. Naruto shrugged, causing her to sigh. She decided to go on to something else she has been curious about. "So red airbending. I've never heard of that before, but that could be because I've only met one other airbender before." "Oh, that. You know how fire changes color based on its temperature?" Azula nodded. "It's sort of the same thing with wind. There was an incident when I was born that ended up with me gaining, among other things, really powerful bending, even for an avatar. It was hard for me to control and it took me months to get it down to a level where I could safely bend in public. The wind I generate is strong and fast enough to catch friction and heat up, and that's where the color comes from." Naruto smiled sheepishly. "The first time I used red wind it was an accident during a fight where I was getting my ass kicked." He looked at the cups and grinned. "Ramen time." He held one of the cups up for Azula to take, which she did. She peered into the cup and raised an eyebrow. "Noodle soup for breakfast." Naruto paused, chopsticks just inches from his mouth, and wordlessly mouthed, "Noodle soup." "Did you just call ramen noodle soup?" He said the words noodle soup incredulously. "What, are you retarded? Are you saying this isn't noodle soup?" She held up some noodles and gestured to them. "Noodle soup wishes it could be ramen. Ramen is the food of the gods. A gift bestowed to us mortals by Kami-sama himself," the blonde exclaimed. He shoved an angry finger in her face. "And not only do complain about it, you actually called it noodle soup." Azula's eye twitched and she slapped his hand out of her face. "Oh, shut up." Honestly, her uncle didn't take tea as serious as this. She ate her ramen and she found that it did somewhat taste better than noodle soup, though Azula didn't feel like admitting that to Naruto right now. As she ate, something Naruto said popped into her head. "When you described the way form types fight you used the word mainly. You also used mainly for the way technique types fight. Why?" Naruto slurped his noodles. "Well, form style bending is great, but it's good to have some ranged attacks too, and there aren't a lot of close range B rank or A rank techniques, and the few that exist usually have some kind of risk to the body." B rank and A rank techniques? Azula wondered. "Like I said, we form types prefer close range combat, but eventually we learn techniques to get higher level attacks and to be able to fight at a distance, and even though technique types train to bend by just manipulating their energy mentally, the use of physical movement increases the speed, power, and control of their bending, plus they work on their physical abilities just in case the fight is brought up close, if only to level of just being able to defend themselves long enough to get some distance. Master-level benders are usually proficient in both areas of combat." Azula nodded. That made sense. As a firebending master, Azula was pretty good in both close and long-range combat, though she couldn't claim she could attack anybody by just mentally willing it. "So I guess that means I'm more of a form type," she thought to herself. "So since you're an airbending master, that means you know some A-rank techniques, right?" "Windbending master, and yes I do," Naruto answered. "How about in firebending? Do you know any A ranks there?" Azula asked. Naruto nodded as he finished his ramen. Azula leaned in and gave him a sort of sultry smile. "You wouldn't mind showing me, would you?" she asked. There was no doubt that these A-rank techniques were the highest level of techniques. She figured that she knew just about all of them, but Naruto was from the future and he probably knew some moves that haven't even been invented yet, moves that would be nice to add to her own set of techniques. Naruto grimaced. The show-off in him wanted to showcase some of his best moves, but the way Azula was smiling at him was making him uncomfortable and was turning him off of the idea of showing her. What, don't you know any? I heard you're supposed to be some kind of prodigy who mastered firebending really young. Azula smirked arrogantly. Yes, that is true, but I want to see what you're capable of, firebending-wise. You said you haven't mastered firebending yet and I am a firebending master, maybe I can give you some helpful pointers. She lied. Naruto frowned in thought. She had a point, but he had the feeling she wasn't being totally honest, plus her earlier performance didn't look like that of a master's. After giving it another moment of thought, Naruto sighed. I'm going to have to find a more open space, I don't want to burn the forest down. Naruto stood on a ledge overlooking a decent-sized rocky flatland and a nearby running stream. This will work. Behind him Azula placed a hand on her hip and waved her other one impatiently. Whatever. Just get on with it. Naruto's eye twitched as he growled in annoyance, but he chose not to retort. You might want to scoot back some, he said to her. Azula rolled her eyes and took 2 steps back. Widening his feet, Naruto closed his eyes and took a few deep breaths before his eyes flew open. Hito. Hurameki Inferno, Flash Inferno. He clasped his hands together above his head and a large burst of fire erupted around him, causing Azula to cover her eyes and move further back. He thrust his clasped hands forward and the flames all shot into the flatland, engulfing the area below in a sea of flame. I should have thought this through, that's going to be a pain to put out. Naruto thought to himself before speaking out loud. You better be satisfied with that because I'm not doing another one. He looked back at Azula to give her an annoyed look for the snooty comment that he was sure wascoming, but stopped as he saw the gobsmacked look on the older girl's face. A smile came to his face. And it suddenly became worth it. Azula gawked at the massive inferno in front of her. What she just witnessed was unbelievable. She had learned firebending from the finest instructors of the art, learned it from her father, who until of recent events was the most powerful firebender in the world, met the most powerful firebenders alive, studied firebending inside and out, and she had never seen nor heard of a single firebender being able to produce such a massive amount of fire, except during a certain occurrence. The day of the comet. At Naruto's laugh she turned her gaze away from the fire and onto him. Naruto was facing her with his chest puffed out and head thrown back, laughing triumphantly. Ha 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 ha, that's right, I'm awesome, go on and admit it. Azula scoffed, crossing her arms under her chest and looking away. Yeah right. Oh, don't try to deny that you weren't amazed. This, Naruto imitated her previous expression, is the face of someone who saw something incredible. Azula blushed a bit before sneering. Don't flatter yourself. Yes, the size of that was startling at first, but after realizing you enhanced it with your avatar state, it's not very impressive. I didn't use any avatar state. Naruto shouted indignantly. When I go into the avatar state my eyes and all of my markings glow. That was just a normal Hurameki Inferno. Normal huh? Azula said a bit shakily as she looked back at the raging fire that was now much smaller because of the clones Naruto created to put it out. Naruto nodded while eyeing her strangely. Are you really a firebending master? Azula snapped her head towards him. Excuse me, I've been a master for almost 3 years now. I happen to be one of the most powerful firebenders in world, possibly the most powerful now that my father can no longer bend. But you thought my Hurameki Inferno was enhanced. A master would have known that was a normal A-rank level technique. Naruto said, and that look on your face after you saw it, I thought it was because you didn't think I was able to use an A-rank technique, but you were actually more surprised by the technique, not me. It was like you've never seen a technique of that level before. Azula mentally cursed for allowing herself to be so easily read. I have seen firebending on that level before, she stated, though it was during a period where firebending was enhanced almost 100-fold. She admitted mentally. Naruto shrugged. Okay. Then he gave her a smug look. But can you bend at that level? Azula scoffed. If I put my mind to it. I've bent flames bigger than that. Again, it was during the comet. Well, go on right ahead then. Naruto challenged with that irritating smug smile still on his face, making her growl. I don't have to prove myself to the likes of you, she said before walking away. Naruto watched her walk away and chuckled. That was fun, he said before jumping down to join his clones in putting out the fire. Say bye-bye to the house. Azula gave the time traveler a dry look before turning to the house. Bye. She sent a blast of fire into a wall. Hey, Naruto cried as blew the fire out. Azula vaguely noticed that his wind wasn't red like it was last night. I want this house to stay, you know, for the people who find themselves having to stay out here overnight, they can stay here and not outside. If that's the case, then I'm doing those people a favor by burning down this monstrosity, Azula said before lighting the house on fire again. Naruto moved to put out the flames, but Azula stopped him. Did you forget that I'm a fugitive? I don't want to leave behind any trace of myself. Naruto sighed disappointedly. Okay, but there are better ways of getting rid of the house than potentially starting a forest fire. With a wave of his arm, a dome of red wind rose up and engulfed the house before dying down a moment later. Azula lowered her hands that were shielding her from the dust and glared at Naruto. Warn me before you do something like that. Naruto grinned sheepishly. Sorry. Sneering, Azula looked over at the house, expecting at worst to see the roof blown off, and took a sharp intake of breath. The house was gone, there was only a pile of wood chips and sawdust where it once stood. Azula paled a bit, he had just instantly demolished the house with just a wave of his gulped. That wind dome was definitely lethal, but airbending, as she understood, was a style that lacked any fatal techniques. Maybe that was why he called it windbending, because it was so different. While it wasn't at the same scale as that weakened A-rank technique, it was still pretty big and powerful, and Naruto was able to use it so effortlessly and casually. He did say wind was the only bending art he mastered. I guess that just shows the difference of skill between his windbending and his firebending. Let's go, Haim-chan. We still got a long way to travel, Naruto said, walking away. Still dazed, Azula silently followed him. Several hours later, walking up a rocky mountain path, Naruto was reminded why he hated walking. This felt like an escort mission, having to travel far at a civilian's pace. And for some reason the client was always somebody who he couldn't get along with at first. Stop, he heard. What's wrong now? He asked. My feet hurt, Azula said, sitting down on a rock. Naruto shot Azula a deadpan look. I offered to carry you. So you can jump around like a Rabiru. I don't think so. How can I trust you not to drop me or that you won't try something? I'm following you unwillingly, remember. I don't want to be tied up in your energy ropes and dragged again. Naruto's eye twitched. Yep, just like an escort mission, only without pay. They're energy threads, and be glad I don't know how to use energy chains yet, it hurts to be tied up in those. Azula just rolled her eyes. Naruto sat down and grumbled. If he was traveling at the pace of a ninja, Naruto could reach that island in about 3 days, or if he flew there, he could be there in under 2. Where is your master exactly? Azula questioned. Some island, Naruto answered. Azula shot Naruto a deadpan look. That could be any part of the Fire Nation, a nation composed entirely of islands. Care to be more specific? All I know is that it's north and it'll take at least a week to get to at the rate we're going, he then grinned. But only 2 days if I carry you. A week, huh? Naruto groaned in exasperation and fell back across the rock. Azula rubbed her feet while thinking. She had about a week to find some supporters and ditch this fool before they met up with this master of his. If she couldn't before they met, things would much more difficult for her. Naruto was powerful, but he was a simpleton. Outsmarting him would be easy. This master of his, however, would definitely be harder to fool, plus the guy was a master. Even she was at her peak. Azula doubted she could defeat both of them in battle. She wasn't even sure she could beat just Naruto. So this master of yours, is he a firebender or a waterbender? Azula asked. You sure do ask a lot of questions, Haim-chan. Naruto commented. I don't like to travel with people I know nothing about, it's unwise. Azula explained. So, what kind of bender is he? Arrow Sennin. Naruto snorted. He isn't a bender. Azula blinked. He's not a bender. Then what is he? A pervert. Naruto thought with a roll of his eyes before answering. A ninja. A master ninja. Azula wasn't expecting that, but the man wasn't a master bender like she first thought and as such wasn't as powerful as one, at least in her mind. She still thought ninjas were cowards who strike from the shadows. But this guy was a master and she knew well how strong a non-bender could be. Is he any strong? Are you kidding? Ero Sennin is a cage-level ninja. By Azula's blank look Naruto could tell she didn't know what he meant by that. He's very strong. If we fought him together the two of us wouldn't stand a chance. Azula scoffed. A non-bender winning against benders of our caliber in a head-on fight. I find that hard to believe. Naruto shook his head amusedly. Spoken like a person who has never seen jutsu. He stood up and dusted his pants off. Anyway, let's get moving. Azula snorted and walked after him. Because your jutsu is so special. Naruto snorted back at her. As someone who uses both bending and jutsu, I have to say, jutsu is better. I mean, bending is great and all, but it's only elemental manipulation. Jutsu can do that and more, much more. Of course, for elemental manipulation bending is better. You have much freer control and it's not as much as a drain on your energy reserves. Azula shot him a dry look. So his argument was jutsu is harder to use and it consumes a lot of energy. But then with jutsu you're not restricted to one element. Azula faltered for a moment. Stop right there. It's impossible to use any more than one element, unless you're the Avatar. No, it's impossible to bend more than one element unless you're the Avatar. Naruto corrected her. But with jutsu it's possible. Jonin-level ninja usually can use at least two nature types. Naruto explained, not noticing Azula gaping at him. An elemental jutsu is just one part of ninjutsu. There's also stuff like medical ninjutsu, barrier ninjutsu, space-time ninjutsu, and then there's taijutsu, genjutsu, fuinjutsu. Azula walked behind Naruto while listening to him talk about abilities such as casting illusions, storing items into scrolls, enhancing physical abilities, and bombs made out of paper, which he demonstrated to her as if it wasn't a huge deal. When he got to the part about summoning giant talking animals, she finally snapped. This is insanity. None of what you've said should be possible by humans, and yet, she thought back to him creating that house, and when he showed her he could walk on walls with just his feet, and when he made a clone out of a puddle. Just what is this chakra stuff that allows you to do this? Naruto groaned. Explaining all of this was making his head hurt. Explaining stuff was Sakura's thing. He was the charge-in and kick-ass guy. Didn't I tell you this already, Haim-chan? Chakra is an energy made by mixing physical and spiritual energy together. What do you mean by physical and spiritual energy? Physical energy is energy from the body and spiritual energy is energy from the mind and soul. Naruto looked back at her oddly. But shouldn't you know what spiritual energy is? Azula raised an eyebrow. Should I? It's half of what we use to bend. What are you talking about? We use Kai to bend. Naruto's face faltered and turned around, blinking up at her in disbelief before squinting and asking, and what is Kai supposed to be? Azula smirked, feeling some satisfaction from Naruto finally being apparently clueless. What's this? The master bender from the future doesn't even know what Kai is. She said, condescending smirk. Kai is metaphysical energy that flows throughout the body that we use to bend. For a moment Naruto just stared at her blankly before bursting into laughter. Azula's face reddened with anger and embarrassment as she watched the younger boy double over, clutching his stomach in laughter with tears in his eyes. What are you laughing at? She shouted. Naruto stood up to start walking again, still laughing. There's no physical energy in Kai, stupid. You're a master but you don't even know what Kai is. I know what Kai is. I said metaphysical, not physical, you idiot. Azula screamed at him. Naruto stopped laughing. Oh. He tilted his head in confusion. What's metaphysical energy? It's, Azula paused, struggling to think of the right word, mystical energy. Naruto also stopped and looked at her skeptically. Mystical? You mean like magic? A look of understanding then came to his face. Oh, now I get it. It's not that you're stupid, you're just from the past, you don't know stuff yet. A tick mark appeared on Azula's head. What is that supposed to mean? She growled out. The blonde backed up and raised his arms up defensively. Calm down, Haim-chan. It's just I'm from the future. There are things we invented that don't exist yet and stuff that we figured out about the world and how the body works and other sciencey smart stuff like that you haven't yet. Azula placed her hand on her hips challengingly. Well, Mr. Know-it-all future boy, why don't you explain to me what Kai is? It's spiritual and natural energy, Naruto stated. Azula blinked at the simple explanation before scowling at his answer. There's a third energy, natural energy. What is this one? Natural energy is energy that comes from nature, Naruto explained as he started walking again. We gather natural energy into our bodies and mix it with our spiritual energy within our Kai paths, where it's then released as Kai. I see, Azula said, quickly finding a connection between that and her own knowledge of bending. It's an outside source of energy, like the sun and how it powers firebending. Sort of. Naruto looked up thoughtfully. The sun makes heat and heat is the biggest source for firebending. You see, there are several different kinds of natural energy and each bending art uses certain kinds. You say that like each art uses more than one kind. Azula spoke. Well, yeah, Naruto replied like it was obvious. I'm not exactly sure how many types of natural energy there are, but there's more than 4. Naruto shrugged. How many did you think there were? He asked with a raised eyebrow. 4. The princess lifted 4 fingers and started listing them off. The sun, the moon, earth, and air, the sources of each bending art. None of those are natural energy, Haim-chan, they're where natural energy comes from, Naruto told her. Azula stared at Naruto. Everything she learned about bending from the finest instructors in the Fire Nation, the best and only explanations they have had for centuries, were being broken down and explained in better detail by a 13-year-old boy, making those fine instructors look like morons in comparison. Azula couldn't believe it. She didn't want to believe it, because that would make her a moron too for going along with those teachings for the past 12 years, and that just wasn't possible. After a while they entered a wide rocky canyon. They walked through in silence for several minutes before Naruto suddenly stopped and started looking around, alarming Azula. Seriously, out here in the middle of nowhere. What is it? She asked, also looking around but not being able to spot anything. We're about to have some guests drop by. Naruto closed his eyes and counted every presence he felt. 5, 11, 18, 34 of them. And they've surrounded us. Several streams of fire raced across the ground and joined together into a circle around the duo. Men came out from behind the surrounding outcrops, 34 in all. You have got to tell me how you do that, Azula said as she dropped into a fighting stance. Naruto stared at the flames. Oh come on, firebending mountain bandits. Really? Oh, we're more than simple mountain bandits, boy, one man said as he stepped forward. He was an older man with long graying hair that reached his mid-back and a long thin mustache. Hi General Chang, Azula said, identifying the man. Princess Azula. My, this is a surprise, Chang stated. General, these guys are part of the army? Naruto asked. Azula looked the man over. He wasn't wearing a military uniform, just simple clothing of a civilian, and his hair wasn't pulled into a topknot. She shook her head negatively. No. The dear general here has deserted. Chang chuckled. You're as sharp as always, Azula. So they're rebels. Azula nodded. Which kind of rebels are they? Which kind? What are you talking about? Azula asked Naruto. There are 3 different types of rebels. Those who want you as Fire Lord, those who want your father, and those who want themselves. Naruto told her. The boy speaks the truth. Chang spoke. Is that so? Azula said. She looked at Chang. So who is it that you support, Chang? Why, you princess, of course. The former general bowed. Bullshit. Chang glared at Naruto. You were able to tell he was lying just from that? Azula asked him. When people lie, the rate of their heartbeat changes and I can hear the heart beating with sound bending. Naruto explained. Azula quirked an eyebrow. Sound bending. A special skill of wind bending. Chang growled and stood up. You're not going to believe this boy over me, are you? Well, actually I already knew you weren't on my side, Azula admitted. Chang looked at her in surprise. We've never been on such formal terms where you can address me without using my title. And when you greeted me you didn't bow, which shows not only that you're not supporting me, you're not supporting my father either, as I would still be his heir. Chang sighed in defeat. Like I said, you're as sharp as always, not that it'll do you any good in this situation, he said with a smirk and gestured his men to move in. Naruto cracked his knuckles. Bring it on. I defeated 100 soldiers the other night. A little over 30 will be a piece of cake. That was mainly due to good positioning, not your own battle prowess, so don't charge in thinking you are invincible. The conditions aren't in our favor this time. Azula hissed. Naruto blinked. What? Those men the other night were boxed by the buildings all in one direction with no cover, unable to avoid those widespread attacks of yours, while you were able to move freely through the ground and air. Here the enemy has us surrounded and they have the high ground while we're out in the open with no cover. Do you understand what I'm saying? She asked him. No. Azula sighed. Try to attack and you'll be blasted from all sides. The first thing we need to do is get out of this circle. Can you do something about that? Naruto looked at the men about to blast them with fire. No problem, he replied with a cocky grin. Chang looked on the two teenagers get engulfed in fire and frowned. They didn't even try to defend themselves. As the flames faded, he expected to see either two charred bodies, two perfectly fine teenagers, or nothing, meaning they escaped. He wasn't expecting to see two large charred stones that weren't previously there. Before they could begin to wonder what was going on, several men were sent crashing into the ground by red gusts of wind. Startled, Chang looked up and immediately jumped back, avoiding a blast of fire. From a ledge Azula jumped down and started attacking him. His men moved in to help but several of them were pelted with a barrage of fireballs. 4 Narutos jumped out in front of them, shocking them at seeing 4 of the same boy, one of them with a smoking mouth. Hito. Hausenka no Waza, Phoenix Sage Fire Technique. He said. You guys are no longer surrounding us. Another one said in a sing-song voice. The rebels growled and punched out fireballs at them. The Narutos swiped through them then pulled their fists back like they were going to firebend but caught them off guard at the last second by opening their fist into a palm and thrust forward, releasing shots of wind that sent 4 of the firebenders flying back. The other rebels regarded him in shock. Was that airbending? One asked out loud. Another one shook his head negatively. No way. Did you see it? It was red. Why yeah. Plus he was firebending earlier. There's no way he can do both. Unless he was the Avatar. The guy who said that was smacked upside his head. You idiot. The Avatar is bald. I'm still trying to figure out how there's 4 of him. You're right. That wasn't airbending. It's called windbending. Naruto raised his right fist and red wind swirled around it. And I am the Avatar. He raised his left fist and it erupted in crimson flames. The Crimson Avatar, Naruto proclaimed. Behind him, one clone had double tornado fists with smoke lightly coming out of his mouth, another hovered a few shuriken above his palm with wind, and the last one was channeling his firebending though his kunai creating blades of fire. All 4 were smirking darkly, creating a terrifying scene for the now pale rebels. Chang blocked 2 shots of fire and retaliated with a blast of his own. Azula sidestepped it and launched 2 arcs of fire at the man. He created a shield of fire to block them then sent a wave of fire at her feet. Azula cut through it and shot a bolt of fire that Chang swept aside. Normal fire Azula, where's that blue fire you're so proud of? Are you hoping to use it for an excuse as to why you were defeated? Azula taunted. Sorry but being defeated by my blue fire is an honor you don't deserve. She thrust both hands forward and launched a powerful blast of fire. Chang raised a wall of fire to block but was still pushed back from the force. Azula kept him further off balance by shooting quick, weak bursts of fire at his feet that sent him stumbling back then shot a stronger blast at his chest that Chang was able to block but was knocked to the ground. Azula fired another shot at his downed form, intending to finish him off, but Chang kicked off a blast that intercepted her shot. The ex-general flipped to his feet and started punching out fireballs at her, forcing Azula onto the defensive. A cage Bunshin redirected a stream of fire to the side and blasted the man who fired it back. 3 more men came up and hurled fireballs at him but the clone easily blocked and fired at them with blasts from his hands and mouth. A fireball from behind almost ended its existence but another clone jumped in and cut through the flames with his fire sword and took out the attacker. Thanks, the first clone said as they moved together back to back. Don't mention it. The third clone landed next to them. There's something weird about these guys firebending. You noticed it too, the second clone commented as he deflected a fireball with his sword. The first clone frowned. What are you talking about? Don't you think their attacks are a little too weak? The second clone asked him. The first clone ducked underneath a fireball and charged forward, wine swirling around his wrist. Kaizo. Senpuken, whirlwind fist. He buried his wind-enhanced fist into a rebel's gut. The man let out a pained scream as he was sent spiraling into several of his comrades. Isn't it just because they're weak physically? The second clone shook his head. There's more to it than that. He chopped through another fireball. It's the fire itself. It's like, there's not much there. The third clone nodded. Yeah, like there's something missing. I've been able to block their fire with wind without much trouble. Are you serious? No way. 4 rebels came up and fired off streams of fire. I'm serious. Watch. The clone created a barrier of wind. The other clones were expecting the fire to feed on the wind, grow, and consume the wind barrier, so they were surprised that when the flames hit they were held back. The second clone blinked. What the hell? That's what I said. The third clone told them. Does the boss know? The first clone asked. Well, if he doesn't, he will now. The third clone dispelled the first clone by slicing him with a wind blade, shocking the second clone. Dude. The third clone shrugged. What? I figured it out. Why should I be dispelled? Plus he took down the least amount of guys out of 4 of us. Azula dove out the way of a fireball, then from her crouched position fired firebolts from her fingers. Chang swiped away each shot and threw his own bolt. Azula rolled away and prepared to fire, but was forced to roll away again as a whip of fire struck where she just was. With a whip in each hand, Chang continued to lash her, forcing Azula to focus on avoiding being struck. In mid-roll, Azula suddenly spun on her back, performing a sweeping kick and unleashing a ring of fire that forced the whips away. Azula pushed herself up to her feet and looked at Chang with a neutral gaze that hid her anger. She recognized that last move she used as one of the more successful moves Zuko used against her in their Agni Kai, which she hated thinking about. She was also angry about how equal her and Chang seemed to be. Neither one had yet to score a solid hit on one another. Azula knew a few months ago defeating a person on Chang's level wouldn't have been too difficult for her. Was she this much weaker without her blue fire? Or was it muscle atrophy from being chained to a bed for 2 months? You truly are skilled. Men more than twice your age haven't given me such a challenge. Chang admitted. Azula scoffed. If only he knew. But you might want to reconsider using your blue fire if you hope to win. Chang told her. Stop thinking so highly of yourself, Chang. Azula replied. Chang growled. You fool. Have you forgotten your situation? Even if it does look like you're going to win, my men will step in. Azula briefly looked to the left, her eyebrows jumping before calmly turning back to Chang. You never had a chance in the first place. Chang continued. This fight was just for my entertainment and could be ended anytime at my leisure. Are you sure about that? Azula asked, jerking her thumb to the left. Chang looked over and felt his jaw go slack. Most of his men were unconscious, all of them bruised, battered, and tied up. They were gathered in front of a boulder, on which Naruto was sitting crossed-legged on watching them. What foolishness is this? How could you let yourselves be defeated by one child? Chang screamed. Naruto glared at him. Hey man, I'm awesome. He said in their defense, as if that would explain everything. Azula smirked at the rebel leader. I guess you didn't factor in that you would be fighting an avatar. Avatar? What are you talking about? That's not the avatar. Well, he's not Avatar Aang, he's Avatar Naruto. It's a long story that I unfortunately won't be able to finish telling before I finish your life. Azula formed a fireball and stalked menacingly towards Chang. The older firebender looked at her fearfully and took a step back before closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. Chang looked at Azula with a calm expression that she narrowed her eyes at. What is he planning? Chang widened his stance and swung his arms in wide arcs, electricity trailing from his extended fingers. Since when could he can do that? Azula thought in alarm. Naruto stood up with wide eyes. That's lightning. And with big movements like that, it's going to be. There it is. The ultimate technique of firebending that only the Grandmaster's able to use. Naruto heard one of the rebels say. Naruto didn't like the sound of that as he watched the ex-general complete the second arc. Naruto looked at Azula and freaked out because she just standing there. What are you doing? Move! He yelled, rushing towards her. Seeing as there was no cover anywhere near her to go behind, Azula waited until right before he fired to move out the way. She feinted to the left, but Chang didn't fall for it and directed his to the right. Azula, however, knew Chang wouldn't fall for the feint and went neither left nor right. Instead she just dropped to the ground where she stood. She watched the lightning sail past her and destroy a boulder. Picking herself up and dusting her clothes off, Azula regarded the man coolly. I wasn't aware you knew that technique. Yes, well, I only just recently learned it after the passing of the comet. With you that makes 6 people who can generate lightning. Azula stated. 5 people actually, Chang corrected. You, the Dragon of the West, General Yujin, General Wu Chang, and myself. Your father isn't a firebender anymore, remember? He reminded her with a cruel grin. Azula glared at him. I was debating sparing you. A man of your talents would have been very valuable to have, but I don't have the patience right now to make you obedient. And you may be able to use the lightning generation technique, but you haven't perfected it. She started circling her arms in wide arcs. Chang growled but quickly calmed himself and started to do the same. Azula finished the process first and shot a bolt at him. Chang was able to release his own bolt that struck Azula's, but the resulting explosion happened much closer to Chang than Azula and he was thrown back. Groaning, Chang looked up and was just barely able to dodge another bolt of lightning. Rolling to his feet, Chang shot a bolt at Azula. She jumped over it with a fire-propelled jump and stopped his attempt to create lightning by forcing to avoid a blast of fire. Landing on a boulder, she and Chang started to generate more lightning when someone started laughing hysterically, breaking their concentration. They turned towards Naruto, who was sitting on the ground, clutching his stomach in laughter. Noticing the 2 combatants looking at him, Naruto tried to compose himself. I'm sorry, go on. He burst into another fit of laughter. What are you laughing at? Azula asked him irritably. No, it's just, the 2 you look like retards. Naruto fell on his side and started laughing again. Shocked, Azula and Chang gaped at him for a moment before turning red in anger and embarrassment while glaring at him. Oh come on, the 2 of you are swinging your arms around like monkeys but are only shooting little bolts of lightning. That's hilarious, Naruto explained to them. He rolled his eyes when he saw them glare at him. What, if you don't want to look stupid then just shoot lightning normally. Seriously, when Chang shot that bolt of lightning Naruto had face faulted. That was not what he was expecting. He grew even more confused when Azula did the same thing. But it quickly became amusing as they kept doing it over and over. We are shooting lightning normally, fool. This is the only way to shoot lightning. There's nothing funny about it. Chang growled at him, angry that this boy was laughing at his most powerful technique. Naruto gave a weak chuckle. Shut up. He's not serious, is he, Haim-chan? Azula nodded. Lightning generation is the ultimate technique of firebending. The smile on Naruto's face dropped. Dear Lord, you're right, it's not funny, it's sad. He claimed. Your ultimate technique is a single bolt of lightning that you can only use by going through big, funny-looking methods. Those funny-looking methods are us separating our yin and yang energies, then releasing the energy from them, colliding back together. Something I doubt a child like you can even comprehend, much less do. Chang sneered at him. Naruto was silent for a moment before speaking. I didn't exactly get all of what you just said, but, except for the yin energy, nothing you just said has anything to do with lightning. In fact, I don't even think what you just said is even possible. The 2 firebenders blinked at him blankly before Chang sneered. Right. Like I'm supposed to listen to a boy tell me the way we use a technique known only by grandmasters is wrong. Naruto looked at him incredulously. Grandmasters. For that. Damn, the firebenders here really do suck. Lightning is only a mid-level skill in my time. Chang frowned, not understanding what he meant by my time, while Azula gaped at him. Mid-level, she squeaked. Naruto shrugged. Maybe not even that. I know a clan of firebenders who only knows how to bend lightning. There are plenty of firebenders who are better with lightning than they are with fire. Hell, I'm better with lightning than I am fire. How is that possible? You use hellfire. It's the weakest form of hellfire. Huh, that has always been used against me in arguments before. Chang looked at the boy who was sprouting nonsense and the girl clearly buying it and decided they were both crazy. He started up another bolt of lightning, catching the attention of the 2 teens. Azula prepared to jump behind the boulder but watched as Chang fired the bolt at Naruto. Not expecting the attack and being closer to Chang, Naruto knew he wouldn't be able to dodge, but then he didn't need to. Almost effortlessly, Naruto backhanded the bolt away, it striking one of the boulders to his left. Chang stood there, gawking at him with his mouth wide open. Azula was in the same state, trying to process what she just witnessed. Lightning, the most powerful technique of firebending and the technique that there was no defending against, besides moving out the way or putting something between you and it, was just swatted aside like a spider fly. So, Azula started after a moment, "How is lightning done?" Asking this kid to explain a different way of lightning generation was admitting every known expert and master of firebending, past and present, were wrong. Naruto groaned at having to explain something else again. He wasn't a teacher, damn it. He absently glanced at Chang and slowly gave the man a dark grin, sending a shiver up his spine. Payback is a bitch. There are 3 methods of lightning bending. Dear Agni, there are 3 different ways. Naruto held up a finger. The first method is to manipulate the bioelectricity in the body. He pointed his finger at Chang. Rado. Rakurai, lightning art, thunderbolt. A bolt of lightning fired from his finger and flew right by the man's head. Instead of just striking the ground and ending there, the bolt continued to cut through the ground, craving a groove all the way up the canyon wall. It's the only method that uses an internal source of lightning. It was the most powerful bolt of lightning Azula had ever seen, and it wasn't even forked. But maybe that was why it was so strong. A normal bolt of lightning focused into one concentrated beam. Raku, whatever he called it, was truly an amazing technique. Rado. Raihado, a lightning surge wave. But compared to that, it was a joke. Chang barely jumped out of the way of the lightning wave. That's right, wave, not a bolt, a wave. Looking over, he could see balls of lightning were coming at him. Chang moved about frantically dodging the balls, bolts, and waves. The scene sort of reminded Azula of how she played with the turtle ducks in the palace pond when she was younger. And she could tell, like her back then, Naruto wasn't really trying to hit Chang. Naruto took a second to listen to Chang's frightened screams with a satisfied grin before continuing. The second method is to gather and manipulate the electricity that's in the air. Naruto put his hand out as lightning started to gather from the air to form a ball of lightning larger than his head. Rado. Ikazuchi Shushkiden, thunder crash bomb. The ball shot forward at a speed Chang couldn't dodge. Desperate and acting, not thinking, he created a wall of fire hoping it would do something. The ball of lightning impacted with the wall, creating an explosion that sent Chang flying backwards. He bounced on the ground several times before sliding to a stop. He shakily picked himself up. He was hurt, but the wall had saved him from being electrocuted. Glaring up, he saw Naruto seemingly going through the motion for lightning generation, lightning trailing from his hands, but then he raised his hand above his hand. Chang frowned in confusion before seeing what he was doing. "Are you kidding me?" he mentally cried as he rolled out the way of a lightning whip. Azula looked on as Chang narrowly dodged the whips, actually getting struck a few times. But besides the pained yells and him being singed a bit, Chang seemed fine. So not only can control the lightning's form, he can also control the lightning's power. He's really bending lightning, not just shooting it. Maybe it would be worthwhile to stick with him for a while. "Hey, Haim-chan." Azula focused on Naruto. "Remember how I told you that the friction from wind can create heat?" Yeah," Azula trailed, unsure where he was going with this. Wind started to swirl around Naruto's fist. Well, heat isn't the only thing friction creates. The miniature tornado crackled with electricity. Azula slowly shook her head in disbelief. He was not about to do what she thought he was. The final method is to use the wind to generate enough friction to create a static charge. All he did is clench his fist and multiple bolts of lightning flew forward from the wind. Once again, the only thing Chang could do was move the hell out of the way. Naruto sighed. This was fun at first, but now it quickly became pathetic. He was starting to feel like a bully. It was time to end this. He raced forward at an incredible speed with his arm pulled back, static electricity gathered around his fist. Rado. Raimeikan, thunder fist. Naruto's electrified fist slammed into Chang's face and sent him back. Chang gave a silent scream of pain as he was electrocuted before passing out. Naruto shook his head at the downed rebel leader before looking up at Azula. I hoped you enjoyed that because that was the last thing I'm explaining, for the rest of the week. Azula stared at him with bugged-out eyes. You bent lightning, with airbending. She squeaked. Windbending. Naruto stressed. How hard is it to remember that? Azula nodded dumbly. Right. Windbending. You bent lightning with windbending. Her eyes rolled back into her head as she passed out. Naruto winced as she fell off the boulder and hit the ground. She's going to feel that when she wakes up. He went over and picked her up piggyback style. Well, she can't tell me I can't carry her now. He looked over at the beaten soldiers once more before sprinting out of there. For the last time. No. Why not? Because I don't want to. But, no. I have to learn proper lightning bending. You don't have to learn, you want to. Azula shook her head. Oh no, I have to learn. I can't go on knowingly using that technique the wrong way. You yourself said it looks foolish. Naruto chuckled to himself and nodded. Yeah, it does. Exactly. Plus learning lightning bending would give me an edge over my pursuers. If any pursuers come, I'll kick their ass. Naruto punched the air a few times for effect. And what if you're not around? Then what? Azula questioned. Why wouldn't I be around? Just teach me. She screamed at him, losing her patience. Naruto groaned and rubbed his neck awkwardly. I don't think I'm the right person to teach you. Why? Because the only way I know how to teach you is the way I learned, and as tempting as it is, I wouldn't feel right beating you into the ground. He told her, making Azula pause. I'm sorry. My grandma, the evil Oni Baba, had me trained with the idea that the best way of learning a technique was by experiencing it, which meant I got the crap kicked out of me every day. Naruto sounded bitter when he said that. It was one of her answers to the problem of me only being able to train for small periods of time. That in all of those intense, bizarre, and painful training methods, she and all of my bending masters put me through. As he said this, a dark cloud formed over his head and he started to slump a bit. Just about every technique I know I learned by getting one safe demonstration before it got used on me repeatedly until I could counter it and perform it. Azula blinked. Wow, your grandmother seems a bit extreme. Naruto turned to her with a twitching eye. A bit. He started stalking towards her. You have no idea. Try being thrown in the middle of a blizzard alone for a month with nothing but the clothes on your back. Try being stranded in the desert for a month with just one little canteen of water. Or learning how to fly by being thrown off a cliff 3 different times. Learning to walk on water while heaving a boulder over your head. By now he was in her face with a crazed look in his eye, forcing Azula to walk backwards. Learning how to burn through metal by being tied up in chains while inside a burning building. Keeping a candle lit for 24 hours, which is hard enough during normal conditions, but damn near impossible during a snowstorm. Blocking lightning with a lightning rod attached to your back so that if you try to dodge you'll still get struck. Creating an energy shield that won't shatter from the force of several explosive notes. I nearly died, you crazy old hag. Naruto suddenly screamed to the sky. A bit blue in the face, Azula stared at him with a sweat drop. What the hell kind of training is that? It sounds more like some sick form of torture. Naruto deflated. You know I still haven't completed that candle exercise yet. He shook his head and turned towards her. Anyways, do you see why you wouldn't want to train under me? I admit, I'm a lot more hesitant than I was before. Azula said. But it's not like I have any other options. Naruto sighed and started walking again. Azula moved after him until she was alongside him. You don't understand the significance of this. Lightning bending is something that was said to be impossible. The most we were able to do was release and guide lightning, not control it like you can. Naruto raised an eyebrow. You can't control your lightning. No. Naruto cringed. That was dangerous. You should really stop using lightning then. Without any control it could backlash and possibly kill you. Azula winced, paling a little. And that is why you should teach me. I can't promise to do that. There may be a time when I need to use lightning. It is my trump card after all. Naruto huffed. Fine. Maybe I'll teach you something. Just stop using lightning until then, alright. Azula nodded, accepting that would be the best she would get out of him for now. In the short amount of time she has spent with the boy, Azula has learned several things about him that irritated her, but the thing she hated the most about Naruto was that he wasn't afraid of her. He was a lot stronger than her and they both knew it, so intimidation by force was out. Aiz was using her title as princess as it didn't hold as much power with the word fugitive in front of it, and even so Azula had the feeling he wouldn't care about something like that. So she couldn't use fear. That was okay. She had other methods of manipulation, like using her natural charisma, though he was cancelling that out with his own gift of ticking her off and causing her to snap at him, which has already happened several times today. She had noticed her control over her anger slipping, and yet that seemed to be the only time he was actually scared of her, when she was genuinely angry. After another hour of walking, Azula's stomach growled. She blushed and frowned down at it, then gazed at Naruto, who was staring back at her with squinted eyes for several moments before grinning. "I'm glad I'm not the only one hungry. Time for a ramen break," he declared happily before digging into his pack. "No, I'm tired of ramen," Azula said. "Tired of ramen?" Naruto frowned at her. "You don't know good food when you taste it." Azula rolled her eyes. "Let's just have something else." "Well, the only thing I have to eat are ration bars." Azula grimaced. "Those things tasted like wood. I wonder if they're a city nearby." Looking up from his bag, Naruto spotted a large rectangular object up ahead. "What's that?" Gazing at what he was referring to, Azula almost laughed at her good fortune. "It's a notice board, which means there is a city nearby." She walked up to it and looked it over for directions while Naruto went to another side. "Just a couple of miles that way." She pointed to the west. "And lucky us, they are having their Fire Day festival today, so we'll be able to blend in easier." "Come on." Naruto made to move after her, but something on the board caught his attention. "Hey, look at this, it's a picture of me." Azula spun around. "What? Yeah, and look, there's one of you too." Azula came over and snatched it off the board. She looked it over, glaring and gritting her teeth as she read before burning it to a crisp, shocking Naruto. "What's your problem? You didn't like your picture. You idiot, those are wanted posters," she explained to him. "Wah, really? That means there's a bounty on my head." Naruto turned back to his poster then smiled. "Hell yeah, I'm awesome, Datbeo. I haven't even been here a week and I've got a bounty." "You're excited about this?" Azula asked incredulously. "Hell yeah. What does it say?" "I can't read it." Azula looked at him. "You don't know how to read?" Naruto blushed. "I know how to read, I just don't know how to read Mandarin." "I can speak the language, not read it." "You speak multiple languages?" she asked in a disbelieving tone. "Of course," Naruto answered. "I'm the Avatar. If I'm going to bring balance to the world, I have to know the language of each land. So far I know my native language of Japanese, Mandarin, and a little bit of English my friend Temujin taught me." Azula just made a small sound of acknowledgement at the new piece of information she learned about the future. So each land has its own language. It sounded weird to her as the entire world currently spoke the same language, the only difference was people from each nation had different accents. She looked at the poster and read out loud. "Wanted. Crimson Avatar. Crimes include aiding the fugitive Princess Azula, attacking military soldiers, and causing extensive damage to the town of Wangjianhuo. Is a master firebender who can bend red and black flames and an airbender who can bend red-colored wind. Also has the ability to create copies of himself. Criminal is highly dangerous." Azula frowned. "How did they find out about your clone technique? The military shouldn't even know about you being the Avatar or that Crimson Avatar title. The only ones who would know that are those Black Fire Order soldiers." She was silent for a moment. Were they captured or did they send this out themselves? The Fire Lord's seal isn't on here, so that is a possibility. "Ah, who cares?" the young time traveler remarked as he took his bounty poster down. "It's out and there's nothing we can do about that. All we can do now is not get captured." Tucking the poster in his shirt, Naruto started walking away. "Now let's go into town and get something to eat." Azula gazed at his smiling face before shaking her head, a small grin on her face. Such a simple, easygoing kid. It's annoying yet almost amusing. The Crimson Avatar. Seriously. Mai stared down at the wanted poster. "I know a lot of officers lie to cover up their incompetence, but Wong couldn't come up with something more believable than this." Zuko grunted as he tossed bread to the turtle ducks. "I don't know. All I have to go on is that Wong's report of what happened, and whole bunch of prisoners he claims are from the Black Fire Order. Aren't they a myth? Mai asked. Supposedly. Zuko answered. Those prisoners all confessed to being rebels, but deny being from the Black Fire. And some of them actually confirmed this kid's existence. Oh come on. A kid who can bend red and black fire, bend red wind, and make copies of himself. For Agni's sake the picture doesn't even look real, yellow hair and whisker marks. Why not add wings while you're at it? Mai remarked. Zuko snorted. So where's Wong now? Mai asked. The Fire Lord scoffed. He's still off after Azula and the prestige he'll gain for capturing her. And a bunch of the more ambitious officers are out doing the same thing. Azula's become this big prize to them, like how Aang was months ago. How did the council react to all of this? Mai inquired. Zuko tossed another piece of bread in the pond. They're furious Wong sent these out without running it by us first. Not only did he announce Azula's escape to the public with these, but he's making it sound like she has an avatar working for her, like that's not going to cause some kind of panic. They're worried about that. Mai sounded skeptical. Well, I am, Zuko admitted. They're more worried about how foolish we'll sound by suggesting there's another avatar. Mai looked down at the poster again. A second avatar. Yeah, that does sound stupid. Zuko laid back into the grass and stared up into the tree. I just want this whole Azula thing finished soon, but knowing my sister that's not going to happen. Who knows, if this kid is real then he should be easy to spot with features like his. Mai said to him. Here are your orders, miss. The cook placed 2 trays of food down. A young brown-haired girl picked them up. Thanks. She walked to a table and set one of the trays down in front of the older girl sitting across from her. Here you go, sis. Azula rolled her eyes. You don't have to call me that all the time. She took a bite of her roast duck and noticed Naruto staring at her. What? Is that enough of a disguise? Naruto asked. You didn't really do much to change your appearance. Well, I can't do anything like change my gender. Naruto looked down at his henge, a long dark brown-haired, gold-eyed girl his age wearing a white long-sleeved shirt, a sleeveless dark red dress, maroon pants, and sandals. Or anything drastic like that without it being permanent or drawing attention to myself, neither of which I want. Okay. Naruto saw her point, however, but still, all you did was let your hair down and take my only pair of sunglasses. He pouted, which as a girl looked very cute. Azula smirked and peered at her reflection off her glass of juice. One small accessory and I'm completely unrecognizable. They're less conspicuous than a cloak and they look cooler too. Naruto sighed and dug into her Komodo sausage. Not bad. Still, it's no ramen. Rolling her eyes, Azula took another piece of roast duck. As she ate she overheard several men speaking. It's true. The whole town is gone. What do you mean gone? It was destroyed. No, it's gone. It disappeared. It was nothing but a large piece of land when I got there. No people, no buildings, just these weird square ditches, like as if all of the buildings were scooped out of the ground. Asterisk scoff, I don't buy it. You probably got lost and went to the wrong place. No wait, I heard the same thing happen to another town not too far from here. Gone, as if it never existed. Oh come on, how does an entire town just disappear? Maybe the spirits are angry about the war and are dragging the Fire Nation to the spirit world town by town. Why would they start to attack us after we stopped the war instead of during it? Azula shook her head and stopped listening to their nonsense. Once they finished their meal Azula grabbed Naruto and told her they were going shopping. Hey, just because I look a girl doesn't mean I like to go clothes shopping. To his surprise Azula didn't take him to any clothing stores. She dragged him around town getting tents, a sleeping bag for herself and as much food and water as she thought they could carry. When he sealed the stuff in some scrolls, Azula started to drag him back to buy more, but Naruto reminded her he already had some supplies and that they should save their money. Azula agreed, remembering that she wasn't rich anymore. Azula was currently looking over a few maps, with Naruto peering from behind her. What's that a map of? The Fire Nation. Azula glanced at her. Where is your master at? She moved over so he get a better look. Naruto ran her finger over the map, trying to find it before shrugging. I don't know. Where are we? She moved her finger more to a southern island. Yeah, actually I'm not very good at reading maps, so you don't know. Azula deadpanned. Naruto laughed sheepishly and turned to another map. What is this a map of? Azula briefly looked at it. It's a world map. Naruto blinked. Really? These are the old four nations. He looked back at the map. Okay, so if this is the Fire Nation, then this, she pointed to the giant light green continent, is the Earth Kingdom, and the Water Tribes are here in the North and South Poles. I remember that. I thought the air temples were supposed to be in the corners of the world. There's nothing but ocean there. Azula's sweat dropped when she saw Naruto was looking for the temples at the actual corners of the map. Shaking her head, she pointed the air temples out to her. It's weird that places so far away from each other are considered to be of the same nation. Naruto said, referring to the air nomads and water tribes. I didn't even know people could live in the North and South Pole. Azula snorted. That's right. They live out there in that frozen wasteland like the savages they are. If it's a frozen wasteland, why did you want to conquer it? She asked her. If we didn't capture it, it would be a place where fugitives could be free to hide out and where a resistance could gather. Plus the Northern Water Tribe would serve as a great location for a prison for earthbenders and the Southern Water Tribe a prison for firebenders. That was what her father told her when she asked him that same question years ago. I see. Naruto gave her a short smile, then awkwardly turned away from her. She wants to turn an entire civilization into a couple of prisons. Wow, that's evil. So no one lives there anymore? Azula asked. Naruto shrugged. Not that I know of. Azula stared at the hanged boy, then looked down at the world map. So you couldn't tell this was a map of the world? It was more of a statement than a question. Mentally debating whether or not to ask this next question, she decided to just go for it. You said the four nations don't exist in your time anymore. What happened to them? Ever since he told her, she hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. Though there was a part of her that didn't want to know, she figured if the worst were to come, with foreknowledge, she would be able to find a way to stop it. Naruto rubbed her neck and laughed sheepishly. History isn't my strong suit either. Azula sighed exasperatedly. So you don't know? Naruto shook her head. She hesitated before speaking. But even if I did, I don't think it would be a good idea to tell you. I shouldn't have even told you about the four nations not existing anymore. Azula's brows furrowed. Why not? Because telling you could change events that could affect the time stream and alter the future. Naruto explained to her. At least that's what happens in movies and manga. I think the presence of you and your other future pals are already doing that. Azula remarked. Maybe they are, but I'm not. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. You want me to what? Naruto exclaimed. We need you to travel back in time and retrieve the people there who are from this era. Spoke a white humanoid tiger with black stripes and blue eyes. The being wore black pants and a sleeveless green Chinese shirt. Naruto stared at the spirits gathered in front of him, which included some of his past lives, in disbelief. Why do I have to do that? I thought it was the Avatar's duty to maintain the balance of the world, not play time cop. Another spirit, female and more humanoid in appearance, answered. Their presence in the past is starting to cause shifts in the space-time continuum that's affecting the world. Naruto frowned at them. Again, why do I have to do that? Why doesn't the Avatar already there send them back if they're causing problems in his time? Well, most of those people there are from the elemental nations. An aged bald man with an arrow tattoo on his head wearing orange robes said. But the main reason we're asking you is because according to the events of time it was Avatar Naruto Uzumaki who brought these people their proper places. He explained. I don't care, I'm not going. Naruto crossed his arms stubbornly. A man with long spiky gray hair placed his hands on the young boy's shoulders. What are you complaining about? We're telling you do something that you're guaranteed to accomplish. You can go without worry because you already know you're going to succeed. Naruto blinked at that, realizing he had a point. He knew if he went he was going to come back and he didn't have to worry if he was going to fail or not. But still. And, the redhead continued, I can tell you that the person who teaches you earthbending happens to be one of these people. Any reservations he had disappeared with that statement as Naruto was now bouncing on his toes looking at his past with excitement. So when do I leave? Naruto anxiously asked. That's what persuaded you to travel back 500 years in time, an earthbending master. Azula deadpanned. You don't even know how long you'll be gone. You could be here for 10, 20 years and they didn't tell you if you'll be coming back in perfect condition either. What do you mean by that? Azula shrugged. Oh, nothing. It's just people can survive losing an arm, or a foot, or some other battle-crippling injuries. She commented innocently. Naruto paled a bit before shaking her head, clearing away any bad thoughts. I'm not worried. Spirits may be callous, but my past lives aren't. They wouldn't send me here if that was going to happen. And you don't know how hard it's been for me to find a master earthbender who won't try to kill me on sight. Naruto explained. Azula raised an eyebrow. Kill you on sight? Let me guess. You're at war and the enemy wants to kill the Avatar and you need to master the other elements to be able to stop them. No, the last war ended before I was born. Naruto said. But relations between us and Iwa, the village where most earthbenders in the elemental nations live, aren't all that great. Plus it doesn't help that I look like my father. What's wrong with looking like your father? A cross between a proud grin and a cocky smirk spread on Naruto's face. During that war my dad was what you may call a badass. Badass, Azula repeated. What, he disobeyed his superiors? No, he wasn't a bad boy, he was a badass. Badass means awesome. Naruto clarified. He was so awesome, took out so many ninja, there was a flea on sight order placed on him. Azula dropped the maps she was holding. A flea on sight order. She stared at Naruto in open-mouthed shock. In the entirety of the 100-Year War there hadn't been a single person who was deemed dangerous enough to warrant such an order, not even the Avatar. What kind of person was his father? Looking down at the world map, Naruto wondered how the Fire Nation was almost able to conquer a country like the Earth Kingdom when it was so much bigger. The Earth Kingdom was the biggest piece of land he had ever seen on a world map. He wondered what exactly happened to make it split into pieces. All he knew was that there was a war so catastrophic it cracked and shifted the land into the 5 continents that exist in his time. He didn't know who fought the war or how long it lasted, but he did know it took the lives of 6 avatars and they didn't like to talk much about it. Growing up with no friends, one of the best perks about being the Avatar to Naruto was the ability to talk with his past lives to be. It was like gaining 1,000 new friends, with whom he talked to whenever he was lonely, which was often. He learned a lot about the world from them, including the past nations, from the 4 nations that currently exist all the way back when there was just one. After paying for the maps, the two of them walked down the road in search of an inn. Didn't you say you were trained by your grandmother in this Arrow Sennin person? Azula asked. I was trained by lots of people, but they were the main 2. Your father didn't train you, at all. Such a powerful man, he must have taught you something. She inquired. Naruto shook her head sadly. No, he died the night I was born. Actually, I've been an orphan my entire life. The Fire Princess didn't expect that, and all she could say was, oh. An awkward silence settled among them as they continued walking. After several moments of neither one of them speaking, Naruto, wanting to break the silence, noticed that they were walking past a zoo. Grabbing her arm, she dragged Azula after her. Hey, let's go here. Azula looked at the zoo sign and frowned. Why do you want to go to the zoo? From the moment I got here I have been on the run, hiding out and fighting soldiers and rebels. Naruto explained. I want to do something fun. But the zoo, Azula said, obvious by her tone that she didn't want to go. Yeah, I want to see what bears looked like 500 years ago. I'm sure they look the same now as they do in your time. Azula remarked dryly. Holy crap, that bear has a duck bill on its face. Naruto exclaimed. Azula pinched the bridge of her nose as Naruto tried to get her to look at the freaky duck bear. It's called a platypus bear. Now hush up and get off the railing, people are staring. She hissed at him. Platypus bear, wow, I have to get pictures or my friends will never believe this. Naruto took out a camera and snapped a picture. Azula stared at the camera. What is that? Naruto blinked dumbly, glancing down at the camera. This. She looked back up grinning. This is technology from the future called a camera. It lets you take a picture with just a click of a button. She aimed the camera at Azula and took a picture. Because of the sunglasses, Azula wasn't blinded by the flash, but it still startled her a bit. Naruto handed her the photo and she looked at it. It was different than any portrait she had ever seen, it looked more real. And that it only took a brief moment for it to happen made it even more impressive. Do you have any more stuff from the future? Oh yeah, plenty of stuff, including 2 other cameras, but without a place to get the film developed they're pretty much worthless here. Naruto told her. Azula stared at Naruto blankly. She didn't know what film was or what he was talking about. Right, she turned and walked away. You saw your bear, now let's go find an inn. No, Naruto whined as she grabbed her arm. We still haven't seen the entire zoo yet. Too bad. I want to go lay in a bed, on an actual mattress. Azula tried to pull her arm out of Naruto's grasp, but Naruto held on. It's not even that late, you can do that later. Today is about fun. Something that you are in desperate need of, now come on. Naruto dragged the girl after her. The pair went around the zoo with Naruto taking a picture of every animal there. After the zoo they stumbled upon a small shot put competition offering 40 silver pieces to the person who could throw the metal ball the farthest. 8 men stepped up to compete, all of them getting between 12 and 16 meters. Naruto had snorted and claimed to be able to do better than that. This elicited laughs from the crowd while the men scoffed or glared at Naruto. One of them held the ball out, wordlessly challenging Naruto, who accepted without hesitation. It was funny to see everyone's face when they saw a 13-girl throw the ball 23 meters. Naruto was grinning in triumph until a big, bulky bear of a man stepped up and threw it 25 meters. Naruto's jaw dropped as the crowd cheered and she walked away dejectedly with Azula half-heartedly consoling her. They then went to see a play called Azalea, Peace Dreamer, a Fire Nation tragedy about a princess who lived during a civil war and the trials she had as she tried to convince her family and the nobles to end the fighting and come to an understanding with the commoners they were at war with, as they ignore her and tried to befriend the rebels but they reject her. Azula had always despised this story, especially since the story was real, which meant Azula was in fact related to Azalea. Azalea was such a weak and pathetic excuse for a princess, it was shameful. Azula herself would never try to understand the rebels, why should she? She was royalty, they were peasants. It was either obey her or die. The most infuriating thing about this story was during the big final battle when Azalea is accidentally mortally wounded by her father when she jumps in and saves the rebel leader by taking the fatal shot meant for him. The Fire Lord and the rebel leader honor her death by making a truce and thus uniting the Fire Nation. A princess sacrificing herself for her people, such a stupid notion, it was the other way around. Fixing a glare on the one who dragged her to this stupid play, Azula almost fell out of her seat when she saw Naruto fast asleep, snoring and drooling. Azula stared at Naruto incredulously. They weren't even 20 minutes into the play yet. Apparently the only thing Naruto paid attention to when hearing about the play was that it was set during a war, which to Naruto meant it was going to be action-packed. In actuality there was very little action and most of it was in the second act, and thus Naruto quickly grew bored. Her eye started to twitch as she growled lowly and a fire formed in her hand. Naruto ran out the theater, holding a burnt bottom, followed by a frantic crowd as a fire raged behind them. Azula walked behind them, calmly humming a tune. Azula glared as she was twisted and jerked around by Naruto among the other people dancing to the music of the band playing nearby. It had gotten dark and Azula had found it harder to see through the sunglasses. Their sunglasses, they meant to block out light, was Naruto's response when she complained. So she had insisted they go to an inn immediately. Their search lasted all of 2 minutes before Naruto heard music and wandered off towards it. Upon seeing the dancing people, Naruto, despite her protests, had dragged her out to dance. There was a reason why dancing was banned. Stupid Zuzu. Azula fell back onto the bed of their inn room with a groan. Naruto hopped on the other bed and released his henge. What a day. You sure did pick a great town to go to. How lucky was it that they were throwing a festival today? Azula grunted. Unlike the endless ball of energy 5 feet away from her, Azula was exhausted after today's activities. Naruto smiled at the tired girl. Thanks. I haven't had a day of just goofing off in a while. Azula raised her head to look at the blonde. Why are you thanking me? You dragged me to all of those places. Yeah, Naruto didn't deny that, but you told me what each of those animals were. That's because you were being loud and I didn't want people to stare. Azula thought irritably. And you suggested we go see that play, even though it was so boring. Naruto added. No, I said let's see a play, because I wanted to stop walking. I didn't say let's see that play, I told you it was stupid. Naruto shrugged. I thought you said that because there wasn't any romance or singing or other girly stuff like that. If Azula had less class she would have snorted. Please, I'm not into stuff like that. Is that right? Naruto looked up thoughtfully. You know, if it wasn't for the fact that I was hanged as a girl I'd say we went on a date today. Azula sat bolt upright, staring at Naruto in bewilderment with a light blush staining her cheeks. Have you lost your mind? How was that a date? Think about it. We ate dinner, hung out, played games, and went to a play. Azula listened to Naruto break down their day, which did sound like a date, much to her embarrassment and irritation. Yeah, but it wasn't. She stated in a tone that said don't think otherwise. It was just friends spending the day with each other, nothing more. She noticed Naruto grinning at her. What are you smiling about? You just said that I'm your friend. He said, his grin growing brighter. That's the first time you've admitted that. Azula shrugged as she got up to go change into sleepwear. So, it's not a big deal. It was a big deal. She had said that without thinking. After the whole incident with Mai and Ty Lee she had decided that she would do away with friends, an idea she had taken too far when she banished everyone around her. She had been afraid to have people who didn't seem to be trustworthy around, and she ironically became controlled by that fear, and that led to her downfall. She has accepted the fact that she is going to have to work with people who may not be completely loyal to her, because despite the risks a ruler needs subjects, and that's all they are, subjects, not friends. Friends meant trust, and she didn't trust anybody. It was later in the night, hours after the festival ended and most people had retired inside. The only people outside were some of the city guard patrolling around and drunks passed out in the street. A trio of guards were walking down a row of houses when the ground started shaking. It's an earthquake, one of them called. No, not an earthquake. Look, the second guard pointed behind them at a house that was sinking into the ground. They looked on as one by one each of the houses sunk into the ground, hearing the cries of the people inside. They watched in shock until they were also consumed by the earth. All around town buildings were sinking underground. People desperate enough jumped out of windows before they were submerged. Azula awoke to the noise and got up to look out the window. She saw large dust clouds in the distance and wondered what was going on when several nearby buildings started sinking. What in the world, Naruto? The boy groaned and turned away from her. Azula's eye twitched. Are you really sleeping through this? She asked the lightly snoring boy. Naruto suddenly shot up, awoken by his EDS early danger sensor right before the room started shaking. What is this? Naruto shouted. Azula looked out the window at the ground that was getting closer. The inn is sinking. What? Naruto ran over and looked out the window. We have to get out here now. She put a foot on the windowsill, prepared to jump. No, Naruto cried. He had a bad feeling about going on the ground. He wrapped his arms around her waist and took off into the air. Hanging high in the sky, Naruto and Azula stared at the scene below them. What the hell is going on? Naruto yelled as the last building disappeared. Where did the town go? To be continued.